Nice, right?
Right.
James, you're
To
so new to everything.
Right, yeah.
And, like, this is my favorite person to worship with, because it's so encouraging to just be like, yeah, like, you're just going for it. You're not giving up. Like, you want to, like, just be pure in heart and just sing out the truth of God. It's so powerful. You were at my house last night and, like, playing my piano and just, like, this stuff. It was so powerful. And, I mean, I've been a musician for 15 years. I teach music. It should be in my heart to be like, oh, that's wrong. Like, you hit that wrong. But it's not. Like, I just want to hear your heart. And I know that's where other people are at. Even if we've been trained, I want to hear it exactly like the radio plays it. In our heart of hearts, we really want to hear what people's souls are saying.
Yeah.
The voice is just a way to utilize it. The music is just a way to pair with it. Beauty comes after your heart of worship. It doesn't come before. Sometimes it can. Sometimes God can use it. But in general, right, the perfection doesn't come first. But God does desire our excellence. Oh, come on in. Hi.
Hello, don't mind me, continue.
Okay, so one thing that I wanted to talk about is that in the Burn atmosphere, repetition is welcome and encouraged, and please do it more than you do in your regular churches if you play in a church. Most of the time, we won't have lyrics up. And we're not trying to get through things quickly.
Right.
God is not in a hurry, okay? He wants to spend time with you. He's not in a rush, especially not here, right? He wants us to sit in this and become it, right? In James 1, it tells us to not just be hearers of the word, to be doers of the word. And it's really hard. Honestly, it's so hard on a Sunday morning, even if I'm playing the songs and I've practiced them, to remember everything that we sang about. I don't know a lot of the time what that verse was talking about unless I really think hard about it. So I can't imagine for the people that aren't playing, that aren't musicians, how hard it must be to be like, wait, what did we talk about? To even remember a theme that you sang about. So if we're sitting here for 10 minutes and all we're singing about is the mercy of God, and we might sing, God, you're merciful over and over, and then go into prophetic, singing for a couple minutes about how merciful he is and how he cares about this person and that person, and then go back into God, you're merciful, God, you're merciful. It's going to be really hard to forget what God was saying at that time. And our memories are going to be a lot better to be able to know, what am I going to do with this mercy?
And just to tag on to that, I was in a class at the Well yesterday. It's an amazing class. And one thing that got brought up that I've been really like chewing on is God's not just a creator, but he's a cultivator. Mm-hmm. And to cultivate, it takes time. So like, we don't have to be in a hurry to sing songs, to sing words. We just follow God's example of cultivating what's going on in that moment.
Yeah, really. It's really true. It's so awesome, you guys. I could teach on this all day long, but for those of you who have experienced moments like this, you know that you have to be in the moment to really know how God does that, because he's not afraid to repeat himself.
Amen.
Until we really get it. And then there's always deeper, there's always more. Yeah. Awesome. Also for intercessors, I wanted to mention that don't be afraid of repetition.
Amen.
You come up and you want to read a verse, read it 4 times. We have time. It's okay. You know? There was somebody that was an intercessor over a set that we did, and she read a lot of stuff. It was so wonderful.
Yeah.
She didn't read the reference that I remember, or maybe I didn't hear it because it was hard to hear. But I was able to hear part of that. And I was so hit by a portion of it that I was able to sing this spontaneous song about it. And the unfortunate part, when I sing spontaneously, is I usually don't remember it, but I just remembered it today. And I texted it to James. I was like, I can't forget this, because it was so powerful.
Yeah.
But I really value it. If you want to say something, say it a couple times so it really hits us. don't be afraid to sit in it. We're not in a hurry. I know I keep saying that, but we live in a very rushed culture, and
Yeah.
it's hard for me to break it. It's hard for me to say, okay, like, we're singing this, like, what are you going to do next, God? What are you going to do? What are you going to do next? And part of that is keeping my eyes open, and part of it is me saying, I don't really care enough to sing about your mercy this many times. And then I have to look at my own heart and go, no, that's worth my whole life, like, thinking about the mercy of God.
Yeah,
So why am I in a rush myself? If God is saying move on, then move on.
right.
You know, He can do that. He can say, okay, that's enough of this. Like, let's move on to this now. Okay. For worship leaders and band members and intercessors, look for themes of what God is saying. I know that seems really obvious, but with spontaneous worship, you can kind of plan things out. You can say, hey, this is always my example, if I'm singing about the goodness of God, then what other songs do I know? What's a chorus that I know that I could throw onto this page? And, write the chords down and say, hey, maybe we'll go into this, or maybe we'll go into that. And hey, maybe this verse, being ready for hanging out on that topic is really valuable. I know I keep reiterating this. Sorry.
Don't be afraid of
so-
repetition.
Oh, boom. There it is.
Oh my goodness. Okay, thank you. I just don't want to be like, but you're right. I am.
You said it.
Forgive me for that.
Morgan.
Yes.
It just reminds me, I had a professor in college who used to say that practice is thoughtful repetition.
Yeah.
But I think it's true, because if we're going to learn the discipline of soaking up His presence, those are muscles that we
Yeah.
have to train. And so the repetition is good, especially when it's armed with thoughtfulness, because then we make new habits.
Yeah.
We make
That's good.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
new ways of going forward to relate with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good.
Just to even use biblical examples of that, what I've been kind of seeing lately is when the Israelites had that 40 years in the deserts because of their disobedience, what God was doing in that next 40 years for the generation that was going to go into the promised land was He was teaching them how to host God's presence.
Yeah.
And so like that was 40 years of learning how to host God's presence,
Yeah.
And so like what if that like they literally couldn't take over they couldn't take over domain of land, they couldn't cultivate land. Their only job was to learn how to host God's presence. And so like that's just kind of what we're getting back to in that purity. Okay, like
It's so good.
and it's just like it takes time. It
Yeah.
takes time to learn. It takes time to grow in that. And God will grow that capacity if we're available to Him and say, God, like, help grow my capacity to be in the prayer room.
Yeah.
Because if we're being honest, and I love church, I love the church, but if we're looking at the structure of the church, maybe we hear a prayer that's max 5 minutes long, and so like the capacity to be in God's presence in a prayer room setting is not modeled in the church very well.
Right.
And so like this, like that's why we go back to like we encourage you to like partner with God in growing that capacity to be in His presence.
Yeah. Yeah, like I've never heard of a church that just said, hey, we're going to take our whole service today and we're going to pray.
The
the whole
Quakers did.
time.
They did.
What?
The Quakers did.
Oh, I mean, yes.
Right.
That's awesome. I personally never.
I've attended one.
Oh, right. No, I know what you're
Yeah.
saying. It's not a
That's
practiced
awesome.
art today.
Yeah, it's really not.
Mhm.
And so we want to do our best to use whatever we can to practice that discipline with thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
And I love that part you said about thoughtfulness, because
Right.
sometimes, honestly, if you're doing only spontaneous worship, and I know I'm talking about the worship aspect a lot, for those of you who aren't worshipers, please, I just want you to know what's going on,
Yeah.
with the band members. But what happens is it can kind of become a game sometimes of like doing it over and over again, and then like what can come next, I don't know, and then we don't want it to be a game, we want it to be a thoughtfulness. So, yes.
I believe it's actually out of your prayer in the closet that this will be developed.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the mystical aspect, searching the mysteries of the Father, and out of that, heart, we begin to develop what we display of His love up at the front.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
I totally agree. It's really wonderful.
I wanted to share something
Yeah.
too about the repetition.
Yeah.
There was a song that Stephanie Gretzinger does, and just during that, she just, goes up into spontaneous worship, and she just, she's like, I know I'm saying this a lot, and it's almost getting on my nerves how
Yeah.
much I'm saying this. But she said, I just really feel like God wants us to just settle into that truth, because I think a lot of times when we're worshiping, it's like we can be worshiping from up here,
Yeah.
from a place of, in our mind of knowing Him, but not letting it really get down into our heart and
Yeah.
settle into that, and let that truth just marinate in our heart and just in His love. And that's where I feel like that the repetition is important,
Yeah. That's awesome. I totally agree. It's fantastic. One other thing. It's so hard to do. It really is at first. But that marinating, we have to leave some space, both as intercessors and worship leaders and band members. We have to leave space where we're not saying anything. And just, whatever Pat is going, whatever's happening, even if silence happens, it's, without that, we can really get into our own heads, and there's not a lot of listening. And so, now, whenever I plan to lead worship, I'm always thinking, where can there be space? Where can there be space? Because it's so hard to leave sometimes. If you're playing with a band, how many of you will be playing with a band at some point? Okay. If you're playing with a band, sometimes it's hard to go into an instrumental where there's no words because not everyone can follow. So just plan for it, Just say, all right, after this song, we're going to leave 5 minutes where you're just playing the keys, and then if we feel like we want to go into something else, we will. Like, at first it kind of has to be like this is going to happen. Because there's such passion, and everybody wants to yeah, God, and everybody wants to go into it. It's wonderful. So good. But we have to leave just some room for awkward and some room for listening on purpose until it becomes this process of, all right, I agree with what you said, God. I hear you here. You're speaking this. And then silence to marinate on it, and then maybe again. And you'll see even videos of Bethel doing that. Now, most likely, if Bethel puts something up on the internet, they're not doing a ton of that. But if you go there, they're doing 3 hours of worship in a lot of their services. So they leave a lot of room. Yes.
When Michael Gungor used to be at Res,
Yeah.
he taught our congregation how to go. He would just get lower and lower, and he said, we're going to go into the presence of God, and he'd bring it, and then there would be complete silence. And at first it was real awkward.
Yeah.
By the time he taught the congregation, you would hear people just crying and weeping during that, because it was such a presence of God in the room, because you knew that's where you were headed, and he taught us how to go there.
It's so good.
And that's actually what they were teaching at the United Pursuit School of Worship, is the awkwardness of the silence. Like
And the waiting.
And the waiting.
Yeah.
When you're with the band, when you're in the secret place long enough, you're going to get to the point where you're just done with words. You're like, I've got nothing else. And then that's where you wait, and it gets awkward. But then that's when God starts speaking, When we have nothing else, God's going to then, encounter us. When we're done with what we have to say, He's just patient. And then we have to be able to withstand that awkwardness in the silence of, okay, what do I do now? And because that's when we're really it goes really deep at that point too. So sometimes when you're practicing, get to that point where you have nothing else to say. If you struggle, if you have a lot to say and you're struggling being silent, then say what you have to say until you get to that point where you get silent, and then just wait.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. One thing that they really drilled into us at Hillside, they didn't drill it into us, but they said it very often, which Hillside is the place that taught me about the burn for 2 weeks if you just showed up. That is who they are. And it's so true that worshiping like this is not an excuse for unpreparedness.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse to show up that day and have not prayed into it, have not planned anything, have not said, God, what are you saying about this time? What are you saying about Grand Rapids or about Holland? Like, what do you hear